In the vast stillness of Qatar's deserts, there's a presence that doesn't speak, but it remembers. It's not written in ancient stone or ink. It hums quietly inside the blood of its people, like a drumbeat older than civilization itself. Nearly half of all Qatari men carry a single, astonishing Y-DNA haplogroup, J1. On paper, it's just a code. But beneath that simplicity lies a mystery so deep it stretches from the Arabian sands to the oldest whispers of Semitic tongues, and maybe even further, to the dawn of settled life itself. J1 isn't a common branch on the global family tree. It is, instead, a rare signature of resilience, concentrated not in sprawling empires, but in arid homelands where survival demanded more than strength. It demanded lineage, honor, legacy, and over time, this gene became the unbroken chain of the desert's patriarchs. But here's where Qatar stuns the world. It's not just that J1 is dominant. It's what scientists found inside it, 29 distinct sublineages, like branches sprouting from a single ancestral trunk. Each one a different story, a different tribe, a different journey across the sands of time. In population genetics, this kind of variation doesn't happen overnight. It happens when a place becomes a cradle, not just of life, but of expansion. That's exactly what happened here. In a massive median joining network, a sort of DNA family tree built in code, Qatari men form a star-like burst around J1. It's not poetic exaggeration, it's real. A literal genetic explosion, captured in the data. And such bursts usually mean one thing: a founder event, where a small group rapidly grows into a powerful lineage, often because of environmental advantage, social structure, or cultural dominance. So who were these J1 ancestors? The answer might lie buried beneath the shifting dunes, but science gives us clues. The high presence of J1 is tied directly to the spread of Semitic languages, especially Arabic, and J1 has been shown to thrive in arid environments, suggesting a possible evolutionary edge in desert survival. That means this wasn't just a biological expansion, it was a cultural one. Language, lineage, and land, all moving as one. But why Qatar? Because Qatar, unlike larger nations, didn't dilute its male lineage over centuries of empire and conquest. Instead, tribal customs, especially patrilineal descent, preserved J1's dominance like a sacred trust. With high consanguinity rates and strong tribal boundaries, the Qatari genome didn't fragment. It crystallized. It's almost paradoxical. In a globalized age where identities blur, Qatar's male DNA is a fortress of memory, a preserved manuscript of ancient paternal bloodlines, coded in nucleotides. And yet, even in its purity, it tells a story of movement. The starburst pattern shows growth, diversification, and migration. These weren't stagnant lineages. They spread. They adapted. They led. So the next time someone looks at Qatar and sees only oil and skyscrapers, remind them, under the steel and glass lies a deeper empire, one of ancestry, of fathers who endured, of a genetic crown passed through generations. This was the story of J1, not just a haplogroup, but the genetic signature of desert kings. She walks barefoot across time. No name, no face, only memory, encoded deep in the DNA of her children. Centuries before ships crossed oceans, before minarets reached for the sky, she arrived. From the coastlines of East Africa, from the valleys of the Nile, from somewhere distant, and yet, somehow, always close. Today, over a third of Qatari mitochondrial DNA, the genetic thread passed only from mothers to children, comes from African ancestry. Not as an anomaly, as a legacy. We're taught to look at deserts and see isolation. But the genome sees something else. Movement, contact, resilience. The mothers who gave rise to modern Qatar carried lineages from sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa, and the broader Eurasian landscape. These weren't singular events. They were waves, subtle, persistent, human. How did they come? Not all stories were chosen. Some came in sorrow, during centuries, when the Indian Ocean slave trade reached the Gulf. Others came in union, through marriage, migration, and the timeless pull of survival. But regardless of how they arrived, their genetic echo remains, louder than history books ever dared to tell. Unlike the Y chromosome, which paints a picture of tight lineage, empty DNA is messy. It's rich. It's alive. In Qatar, it reveals a complex maternal ancestry that defies any single origin. The diversity here is not noise, it's harmony. A blend of ancient Levantine farmer lines, Horn of Africa matriarchs, and maternal branches that stretch back to the earliest dispersals out of Africa. Genetically, this makes Qatar an anomaly. Most populations on the Arabian Peninsula show higher male line stability, but Qatar's female lines are unusually diverse. In scientific terms, the population structure is asymmetric. Male lines conserved through tribalism and patrilocal traditions, female lines expanded through social mobility, intermarriage, and external contact. This isn't just data. This is history's quiet truth, that the women who shaped Qatar's people did not come from a single tribe, or even a single continent. They came from everywhere, and their stories live not in monuments, but mitochondria. One particularly striking detail emerges in the sequencing. Some Qatari mtDNA lineages trace back to East African haplogroups that are tens of thousands of years old, predating agriculture, predating written language. These lineages are living fossils, surviving not in museums, but in living families. In a world obsessed with paternity, these maternal signatures whisper something more intimate. Origin is not just where you begin, it's who carries you forward. And as we trace these lineages, a subtle truth reveals itself. While political borders rose and fell, while tribes warred and empires collapsed, the mothers moved. Sometimes in chains, sometimes in caravans, but always forward, always embedding their strength in the future. The Eurasian elements in Qatari DNA tell another chapter of Neolithic migration from the Levant, of female settlers bringing with them farming traditions, domestic tools, and perhaps even the rituals that still echo in parts of Qatari culture today. Together, these maternal histories, African and Eurasian, form not a contradiction, but a mosaic. Qatar isn't genetically unique because it was untouched. It's unique because it was embraced by movement. There's a line in mitochondrial science, poetic in its simplicity. All humans share a mother. But in Qatar, that mother speaks with many tongues, carries many shadows, and leaves behind a signature that defies simplification. Her footsteps may be lost in the sand, but her story? It's still breathing. Qatar is a land that shouldn't exist. A sliver of desert jetting into the sea, scorched by heat, surrounded by empires that overshadow it in size and story. And yet, beneath its surface lies a secret. It was never on the edge of history. It was the passage through which history moved. For thousands of years, the Qatari Peninsula was more than a landmass. It was a corridor, a bridge in motion, a crossing point not just for merchants and sailors, but for bloodlines, languages, and forgotten civilizations. The DNA doesn't lie. Modern genetic models, especially those using Bayesian inference, reveal something remarkable. When scientists mapped ancient male lineages, they discovered a pattern of migration that follows a clear arc, from the mountains of Yemen, curling up along the coast, sweeping through Qatar, and continuing into Kuwait and southern Iraq. This wasn't random drift. It was purposeful movement, shaped by survival, trade, and climate. In these analyses, Qatar isn't a terminal point. It's a gate. The peninsula acted as a stopover for genes carried by early Semitic-speaking groups migrating northward from Arabia's heart. And the data shows more than simple passage. It shows interaction. At each stage, lineages paused, mingled, diversified, and then moved again. Qatar became a genetic mixing point, a living ledger of movement across millennia. But there's more. When researchers compared Qatari male haplotypes with those from 38 surrounding Middle Eastern populations, a stunning relationship emerged. Despite its southern position, Qatar clustered closest to Iraqi Arabs, a group with roots stretching deep into Mesopotamia. Not Saudi Arabia, not Bahrain, but Iraq. This genetic kinship suggests a forgotten intimacy between the Gulf and Mesopotamia, likely formed when ancient maritime routes connected the two. Pottery from the Ubaid period, nearly 6,000 years ago, found along Qatar's shores matches that of early southern Iraq. This wasn't trade alone. It was kinship carved into clay and etched into genes. And this connection didn't end in prehistory. Even during the Islamic Golden Age, movement from the Levant and Mesopotamia into the Gulf continued, scholars, traders, artisans, entire families, bringing with them cultural traditions and genetic threads that still linger in the Qatari genome today. But the story is layered. Qataris also carry deep ties to Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and the broader Arabian Peninsula. When analyzed through multidimensional scaling and RST values, Qatari DNA occupies a unique position, overlapping clusters, bridging communities that would otherwise seem distinct. It's as if Qatar was never meant to belong to one world. It was meant to connect them all. In forensic and population databases, Qatar stands out again. The high diversity in specific YSDR loci, like DYS 458, reveals a history of local growth following ancient migration. Not a frozen population, but a dynamic one. A place where ancient lineages didn't just survive, they evolved. And that evolution tells us something profound. Borders are recent. Bloodlines are not. The Qatari genome reminds us that the land we see today was once coastline, caravan route, and harbor. That the people of this desert were once, and still are, travelers in their own history. When we say Qatar was a genetic bridge, we're not speaking metaphorically. We're speaking scientifically. Every strand of its DNA is an artifact. Every mutation, a footprint. Every connection, a doorway between past and present. In the end, this tiny peninsula holds a truth the modern world often forgets, that greatness is not always loud, and that the most powerful legacies are the ones buried quietly in our bones. In Qatar, your name is more than identity, it's archaeology. A surname here doesn't just tell you who your father is. It whispers where your blood has wandered, what languages your ancestors once spoke, and who they chose to call kin in centuries long erased by wind and time. Genetics is now decoding what oral tradition preserved for generations, a silent record of tribe, migration, and ancestry, written not in books, but in chromosomes. A landmark study revealed something extraordinary. When researchers compared genetic profiles with Qatari surnames, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Entire segments of the population grouped cleanly into 3 ancestral strata, each bearing a distinct geographic and ethnic legacy. The first group, known in data as Qatar 1, traces its roots to deep peninsular Arab tribes. These are the descendants of the Bedouin, lineages forged in the furnace of the desert, shaped by survival, and preserved through rigid patrilineal structures. Their DNA reflects low external admixture but high internal continuity. In the genetic landscape of Qatar, they are the foundation stones. Then comes Qatar 2. Here the story changes. This group carries a strong Persian signature, a blend of Gulf Arab and Iranian ancestry. They represent the centuries when Persian Gulf trade routes flourished, when migration wasn't a disruption but a dialogue. Their surnames often hint at places across the Gulf, and their genomes echo that legacy with markers not found in the tribal heartlands of Arabia. And then there's Qatar 3, the most genetically diverse of all. This group holds within it a powerful African signal, combined with elements from the Indian subcontinent and broader Middle East. It is in Qatar 3 that the full spectrum of migration, trade, and social exchange becomes visible. They are the genome's answer to the question, what happens when a land stands at the crossroads of empires? Each group is different, but none are accidental. Their structures have been carved by centuries of social behavior. Consanguinity, the practice of marrying within close kin, has helped preserve rare genetic variants across all 3. At first glance, this might seem like a constraint, but in population genetics, it's a magnifying glass. It reveals sublineages and ancestral signatures that larger, more intermixed populations simply lose. In Qatar, the tradition of patrilocality, where families are rooted through male lineage, further deepened this structure. Sons stayed, daughters married out. This created a landscape where the Y chromosome became a genetic time capsule, unbroken through father after father after father. But what makes this even more remarkable is the alignment between genetic clustering and surnames. In most of the world, surnames are cultural artifacts, loosely tied to genetics, if at all. But in Qatar, they mirror the genome like shadows. The connection is precise, deliberate. It reflects a society where ancestry isn't folklore, it's governance. It decides inheritance, status, belonging. This is where science and culture lock hands. Where tradition isn't at odds with modern biology, it's validated by it. The Qatari genome becomes a living map of tribal memory, one that predates national borders, colonial atlases, or academic disciplines. What's even more intriguing is that these population clusters didn't arise in isolation. They formed in dialogue with regional migrations, responding to tides of movement from Iraq, Iran, Africa, and the Levant. Yet within this constant change, the tribal core held fast. This balance between openness and rootedness is the secret to Qatar's genetic distinctiveness. It didn't freeze its past. It archived it through social norms, marriage customs, and fierce tribal fidelity. It created a society where surnames and sequences still speak the same language. And so, in Qatar, when someone tells you their name, they are telling you more than who they are. They are offering you a window into centuries of belonging, into a world where identity is not worn, it's inherited. In the dust of the desert, some lineages fade, but one endures like the breath of the land itself. Haplogroup J1, a genetic marker so deeply tied to the Arabian Peninsula that it feels almost territorial. And yet, its story is anything but static. It's a paradox, ancient and adaptive, tribal and expansive, regional yet widespread. It is, in every sense, the bloodline of contradiction. This Y chromosome haplogroup dominates the Qatari male genome, as it does in much of Arabia. But when scientists look beyond Qatar, to the rest of the Middle East and beyond, something startling appeared. In Saudi Arabia and Yemen, J1 frequencies soar past 70%, but trace the same lineage northward, and it begins to vanish. In Lebanon, barely present. In Turkey, even less. What could explain this steep genetic cliff? The answer, it turns out, lies in survival. Not the survival of armies or politics, but of physiology and environment. J1 is intimately associated with adaptation to arid climates, a trait shaped not by culture, but by the unforgiving rhythm of desert life. Genomic studies have linked it with gene variants that may regulate heat stress, hydration, and energy metabolism, traits vital for survival under relentless sun and scarce water. But biology is only one side of this story. Culture plays its hand, too. As Semitic languages began to expand thousands of years ago, first across the Arabian Peninsula, then outward into the Levant, Mesopotamia, and eventually North Africa, J1 moved with them, not just as a passenger, but as a pioneer. This lineage didn't spread with empire alone. It spread with identity. In linguistic anthropology, J1 has become a powerful marker of Semitic expansion, Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, each carrying echoes of J1 in its demographic shadow. In Qatar, the dominance of J1 aligns almost perfectly with the historical movement of Proto-Arabic speakers, suggesting that this wasn't just a genetic migration, but a cultural renaissance. Yet, here's where the paradox deepens. Despite its strength, J1 is not a universal Arab signature. In some Levantine regions, even among Arabic-speaking populations, J1 is nearly absent. In their place, haplogroups like J2 or R1A take root, markers of different histories, different adaptations. This tells us that Arabness, as an identity, is not monolithic. It is layered, shaped as much by environment as by ancestry. And within J1 itself lies another revelation, microvariants. In Qatar, one marker stands out, DYS458, a YSDR locus that shows extreme polymorphism. More than half of Qatari men carry rare microvariant alleles at this locus, a fingerprint of both deep time and recent evolution. These aren't random mutations. They are the shadows of expansions, bottlenecks, and isolations etched across centuries. The high frequency of these microvariants is more than a forensic curiosity. It's a story etched in the genome, of founder effects, where small male lineages rapidly multiplied, of tribalism, where marriages were deliberately confined to preserve purity, and of social systems, where patrilineal descent determined everything from inheritance to honor. In this light, J1 is no longer just a haplogroup. It's a historical instrument, one that reveals how geography, language, environment, and culture conspired to shape the identity of entire regions. It shows us that in Qatar, DNA did not merely survive the desert, it evolved with it. And maybe that's the secret behind J1's paradox. It's not that it spread because it was strong. It became strong because it learned how to stay. Before there was a Qatar, there was water, a gulf wider, deeper, and dotted with ships long vanished beneath the tide of centuries. And across that water, toward the marshes of southern Mesopotamia, voices rose in a language no longer spoken, voices that now echo in Qatari DNA. This isn't romantic imagination. It's molecular truth. When researchers overlaid Qatar's genetic data with that of ancient Mesopotamian-linked populations, a pattern emerged with chilling clarity. Despite being hundreds of kilometers apart, Qataris and southern Iraqis, specifically Arab populations, share a remarkably tight genetic affinity, closer, in fact, than with some of Qatar's near neighbors. But the genome didn't explain why. For that, we turn to the mud. Archaeologists digging along Qatar's northeast coast found pottery fragments nearly 6,000 years old, unmistakably Ubaid. These ceramic pieces match those discovered in Eridu and Ur, heartlands of the first organized cities. This wasn't trade in the abstract. It was intimacy, a corridor of exchange so robust, it left both artistic and genetic residue. Imagine the scene. Reed boats gliding over calm waters, carrying cargo not only of goods but of genomes. Mariners from Mesopotamia arriving on Qatar's shores, perhaps bringing with them families, farmers, fishers, embedding themselves into the peninsula's earliest settlements. This wasn't conquest. It was continuity. Genetic signatures support it. Through multidimensional scaling, Qatar appears as a satellite to the Iraqi-Arab cluster, not due to recent mixing, but ancient alignment. The distance in geography is erased by depth in time, and that is the fingerprint, a shared origin hidden beneath millennia of divergence. But this link isn't singular. The Qatari genome also reflects deep interaction with Levantine Neolithic populations, early agriculturalists who moved southward, hugging coastlines, bringing with them technologies, customs, and most importantly, genes. That movement etched its mark into Qatar's genetic profile, particularly in autosomal sequences, not just in isolated haplogroups. In effect, the population we now call Qatari stands at a genetic intersection between the Fertile Crescent's intellectual fire and Arabia's nomadic heart. And here's the part that few realize. This convergence happened before Islam, before kingdoms, before history as we record it. By the time early Islamic scholars were mapping the tribes of Arabia, the Mesopotamian threads were already woven into Qatar's identity. That explains why, even today, certain dialects, tribal structures, and customs in Qatar echo rhythms found across the Shatt al-Arab basin. It's not mimicry, it's memory. But this is more than cultural nostalgia. In modern population studies, these ancient ties shape present-day genetics, affecting everything from disease susceptibility to pharmacogenetics. The legacy of Mesopotamia isn't just historical. It's medical, biological, and real. It means that when a Qatari child is born today, they are not only inheriting a desert past, but also the quiet legacy of Sumerian farmers, Akkadian settlers, and Ubaid navigators who walked into the peninsula long before maps existed. We often talk about ancestry as a tree, but Qatar's is a river, flowing from the highlands of early civilization through forgotten maritime routes, pooling into a genome that still pulses with its origin. So the next time you look at a modern skyline in Doha, know this: beneath its glass and steel, ancient Mesopotamia is still speaking, not in words, but in the silent language of genes. In the silence of a laboratory, a sequencer hums. Lights blink across a machine no larger than a suitcase, and yet, within it, thousands of years are being decoded in real time. This is not mythology. This is the future, and Qatar stands at its front lines. In a world where most genetic databases overlook Arab populations, the Qatar Genome Project emerged as a landmark. It didn't just collect samples, it built a mirror, one that finally reflected the Middle East on its own genetic terms. Over 6,000 whole genomes were sequenced, each one a mosaic of ancestry, migration, survival, and isolation, each one carrying the whisper of ancient routes and modern realities. And what they found changed everything. Nearly 28% of the identified variants in the Qatari dataset had never been cataloged in any global reference panel. Not in the 1,000 Genomes Project. Not in NAM-AD. not in the databanks of Europe or East Asia. These variants were invisible until now. Why does that matter? Because invisibility in genetics is a kind of erasure. If your variants don't exist in the databases, then medicine can't see you. Risk scores fail. Diagnostic tools miss. Therapies misfire. For decades, Arab genomes were seen as rare, simply because no one had looked closely enough. Now they have, and the view is astonishing. Qataris carry rare alleles that affect drug metabolism, immune response, and inherited disorders, some unique to specific tribes, others scattered across subgroups shaped by centuries of consanguinity and founder effects. These aren't just population quirks. They are critical pieces in the global puzzle of precision medicine. For instance, conditions like familial hypercholesterolemia or G6PD deficiency show elevated frequencies in specific Qatari lineages, not by chance, but because of how tribes married, migrated, and preserved bloodlines. The genome isn't random. It remembers. And yet it also evolves. Through admixture modeling and variant tracking, scientists can now map how genes from Africa, Persia, and South Asia entered the Qatari population, sometimes hundreds of years ago, sometimes just a few generations back. They don't blend evenly. Some settle quietly into mitochondrial regions. Others disrupt coding regions with consequences we're only beginning to understand. But here's the most profound insight. Despite centuries of geographic constriction and cultural preservation, the Qatari genome isn't stagnant. It's adaptive. It has absorbed global influences without losing its core structure. It is, in a very real sense, both ancient and modern at once. What does this mean going forward? It means that Qataris, and by extension, other Arab populations, can no longer be treated as an afterthought in genetic research. Their inclusion doesn't just benefit local communities. It improves the accuracy of genetic prediction models worldwide. The Middle East, once seen as a genomic blank spot, is now one of its most dynamic frontiers. And so, the story that began with J1 fathers and African maternal lines, with tribal names and Mesopotamian whispers, ends here in data, not as a full stop, but as a new chapter. In hospitals, in research labs, in treatment plans shaped by genome-aware medicine, the legacy of these ancient migrations now helps shape modern lives. Qatar's DNA no longer just tells us who they were. It tells us what they're becoming.